Hi everybody. Question from a viewer, subscriber, asking me if I saw a link between obesity and narcissism. And it so happened that I had been recently watching that show, My 600-Pound Life, or something like that. And I had noticed a theme of narcissism while watching that show. I also noticed morbidly obese to where they're bedridden in this case. This was a little bit complicated because it wasn't always the obese person, or it was that person and also the person feeding them. And there was definitely a dynamic of something very, very codependent and very, very unhealthy going on there. But the person in the bed developed a kind of narcissism because you're completely self-focused, especially when you really literally cannot get out of bed. So where else is there, And so, you couldn't help but become narcissistic, almost in the way that children are, because as you expand, you become less narcissistic, but they're not expanding except for a controlling thing going on with the feeder person, the person feeding them. Then I would also see it where that person looked very much like they were just exhausted and of service. They were just having to serve, and their whole life was being run by this thing. Then I watched, there seemed to be very much a correlation between that and a couple other things I started noticing across the board. And sometimes I looked at certain people that I've known in my life, and they might have been all of them. So also I noticed a similar thing with hoarders. And I also noticed a similar thing with this whole Munchausen by proxy. People will, it's a form of either child abuse or elder abuse, where you take, or a person who's a caregiver over a vulnerable person, a disabled person, a child, or an elderly person, and where they will either exaggerate their symptoms when talking to medical professionals, or they will actually literally make them have symptoms like suffocate their child until it turns blue and then rush them into the ER because they want the attention. There's a few different theories about it. Some is that they want the attention. Others are that they like the satisfaction that comes from outsmarting medical professionals. I think it's about attention. It could also be that they're all getting all this attention for being such a, dutiful caregiver, being so selfless and, caring. Well, so, this kind of caused me to, kind of go a little bit further and look into it. And I started looking at gluttony. Gluttony is an overindulgence, particularly about food. And then gluttony led me to greed. And then that led me to lust. And I started realizing that I was going down the 7 deadly sins back in the Bible, the 7 deadly sins. And it occurred to me that the 7 deadly sins basically equal narcissism. Let me read you this. All right, so the 7 deadly sins. Pride is an excessive belief in one's own abilities. Envy is wanting what others have, be it status, abilities, or possessions. Gluttony is a desire to eat or consume more than you require. It's also just taking more, entitlement, taking more than you need. Greed is a desire for material wealth or gain. Sloth is a laziness or an avoidance of work. Does that not sound like a narcissist? It sounds like they could just say, forget all that, just narcissist. I am not a student of the Bible, any of that stuff, but I think that it's quite interesting that these, old things, the 7 deadly sins, have now come up, and they seem to, as far as I'm concerned, almost draw a picture of a narcissist. Just for fun, let's look what the 7 virtues are and see if we see a theme. Okay, there are also a number of sets of virtues, including this humility, kindness, abstinence against gluttony, chastity against lust, patience, liberality against greed, and diligence against sloth. This is what you kind of always come to. When you come to realizing we try to be so modern and reinvent everything all the time, they had a lot of wisdom. A lot of wisdom always, back in the day. Even when they were writing books on stone tablets, they had wisdom that we are up with the word narcissism much later than this, but I think old Narcissist was having a problem with the 7 deadly sins. Thinking about people in my own life, what I noticed was it's letting anything become the demanding thing in your life. Anorexia, bulimia, other eating disorders like that are equally narcissistic if they're ruling your life. Any addiction is by definition narcissistic. Obsessive compulsive disorder, about, germaphobes and all that, that's also narcissistic. If it starts ruling your life, inconveniencing everybody else that you're living with and ruling other people's lives, much of what, if I can say that there's a silver lining to some of the ways that I was raised, it would have to be that I did not have an environment that would have allowed for me to have any of these issues, because it just wouldn't have been indulged. I didn't become especially self-indulgent. In fact, I have had to work my way out of being a person who can deprive myself pretty well. But this whole like overly indulging yourself, things run away with you. A lot of what kept me from doing that was my concern for other people's feelings. So it dictated everything. I would never have been able to do that to other people. I would have felt so self-conscious about doing that. My addictions or my phobias or things were ruling other people's lives or affecting other people, that would really have bothered me. And especially if they were affecting my children or my marriage or something like that, that would have really, really bothered me. You know, maybe if I'd been left alone on a deserted island, I would have become really obsessive and compulsive and had all kinds of addictions and disorders. But because I had other people in my life and because relationships were what I cared about, it saved me from getting caught up in my own craziness. What I guess I'm trying to get to here is that mental health comes from expanding, progressing, continuing to grow, and continuing to give and contribute. If all you're doing is taking, and all you're doing is being served instead of serving, and all you're doing is thinking about your own, even your own problems, even if I'm not even saying these people are loving it, they may be hating it, but they're still mired in it. The only answer, it seems to me, is that they have to start thinking about somebody else. They have to start doing something for somebody else. And so yes, I would say, subscriber, I would definitely say there is a link between obesity and narcissism. I would also say people maybe think we're more positive. If they're extreme, I would say that that's just as narcissistic. What's not narcissistic is balance and the ability to be present with other people and the ability to let things other than keeping your own sense of anxiety down is the priority in your life. You know, if your priority that's ruling your life is trying to stay comfortable, then that is narcissistic. Absolutely. All allowed to have our craziness, our private crazinesses, and we're all allowed to have our indulgences as long as we're providing for ourselves and we're not impacting other people. But when they start impacting other people, and then I think that we are really getting into dangerous territory, and our life starts to shrink. But if you're doing things that, like, you are taking food out of your children's mouths because you have a gambling addiction, or you're such a hoarder that your children are embarrassed to bring their friends home from school, or you can't take proper care of your kids because your house is such a mess. Your children are embarrassed of you, or you can't play with them and be active with them because you are so overweight. Really poor role model for your kid. You know, those are the things that should motivate a person to progress and grow and change. And if you can't change, who do we know that can't change? Let's all say it together. Narcissists. Narcissists don't change. So the problem with narcissists is they cannot tell themselves no. They cannot tell themselves no. They can't look at what they're doing and go, hey, no, you're screwing up here. Screwing up your life. You gotta get yourself under control. My father, he was extreme narcissist, completely overt narcissist. So it didn't try and make you think that he was anything else but the overt narcissist that he was. And he would just, say what he wanted to say and talk about what he wanted to talk about and keep talking, repeat his stories 100,000 times. Didn't care if he knew you'd heard it before. He was interested in hearing it again, so he assumed you were too. And I loved him so much, and I didn't know from all my life, I didn't know what the problem was. And so I just chalked it up as something endearing about him until finally, I really needed him. I really needed him and my mother, and I saw the writing on the wall. But until that day came, if that day had never come, our whole lives might have gone through, and I may not have ever exactly known what the problem was. I just wouldn't have felt especially close to him, but I would never have fully understood it. It took needing him, needing my narcissistic parents. Any obsession like that, anything that's ruling your life like that, is linked to narcissism. Let me know what you think. Do you see a link between narcissism and eating disorders or hoarding or any of these extreme behaviors?